Hi, I'm Sam Candy. Welcome to Sustain Talks. Today, I'm joined by Paul Spiers, founder and host of the new P&L, Principles and Leadership in Business podcast series. Very much excited to have you here today and hear a bit more about how you came to do what you do. Please tell us more about your background and about the P&L Principles of Leadership.
Thanks very much, Sam, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and chat with you. Cheers. The background to the new P&L, I've had, I guess, around 30 years in brand strategy, reputation management, and so on, mainly running my own agencies on the entrepreneurial side, sometimes on client side as well. And then around 5 years ago, the idea for the new P&L, Principles and Leadership, came to me. I had my own marketing agency at the time, and we were subject to, I guess you could say, a series of quite unethical actions that took the agency to its knees at that point. But being a creative at heart, I kind of had the idea of something came to me and said, there's got to be a new P&L, a new way of doing things based on principles and leadership, not just profit and loss. And that idea hung around in the dusty back blocks of my brain for many years, and I kept revisiting it. And then around 2 years ago, it merged somewhere in there with the idea of a podcast. So I thought I would just dip my toe in and see whether the concept of the new P&L resonated. And it did. And we grew quite exponentially over the last 2 years. So at the beginning of last year, 2021, I launched the new P&L Brand Purpose Institute. And that's really bringing together my professional experience and my passion for purpose and leadership and principles in business. And we work with businesses now to redefine and realign the principles and purpose that underpin their business and their commercial ambitions.
So, you've obviously spoke to lots of leaders and you've delved really, really deep into this topic. From the conversations that you've had, from your own thoughts, what do you think are the key principles of leadership, of good leadership?
Yeah, I think there's probably no defined set. Everyone has a slightly different view, but mine is certainly, it's got to start with self-awareness. If a leader isn't aware of their own strengths and particularly their own weaknesses, the way they act with people and react to people, the way their conversations impact on people, then I think the basis for all other leadership characteristics are somewhat redundant, because I think you have to have quite an acute sense of self-awareness, and that's got to come through your own holding a mirror up to yourself, but also having someone else to do that with as well, a mentor or a coach. If you've got self-awareness, then after that, I think empathy and understanding, putting yourself in someone else's shoes to be able to have that conversation and understand where that person sits in relation to the discussion or the action you're having with them. And then courage, resilience, an ongoing thirst for leadership and knowledge, I think, is absolutely critical. I think there's a principle in business that we seem to think when we get to a leadership position, we stop asking questions and just start answering them. But in fact, it's the one time that we should be learning more and asking more questions than ever. Creativity, an increasingly important route or characteristic for leaders, because I don't think we have all of the answers, and all of the answers aren't out there. So we have to explore what we can do to take our business to the next level in a very new environment. I think as we come out of the pandemic, there are lots of different leadership characteristics that are required, and one of those is clearly creativity. And then the ability to both have one foot in that moment, be super present in that moment, but also be able to focus on the future, to have that vision for the future as a result of sitting in that moment as well. And it's a delicate balance, I think, between being super present, but also having that vision on the future. But those, I guess, the 7 characteristics I think are pretty fundamental.
Yeah, I think over the last 2 years, it's really, the way that we think about business has really changed. Definitely 3 years ago, it was all profit and loss. But now purpose has become so much more important. You can see the growth of B Corp and how important that purpose is. What do you think there's a reason why that's changed?
Yeah, I think there are lots of reasons. I think it was not naturally, but it was generally transitioning towards more purpose-led business prior to the pandemic anyway. If you look at Unilever's, sustainable living plan and various other big businesses that were moving towards recognizing their social impact, recognizing their place in society as businesses for society rather than just taking from. So I think there was a general movement towards more purpose-led business. But I think the pandemic has absolutely accentuated that recognition, I think, in the minds of employees. We've had for those who haven't commuted, they've had a bit more time to think about what the business is, or what the principles and the purpose are of the business that they work for. And for a lot of employees, which I guess is behind the great resignation, they've actually realized that their business doesn't stand for a lot. And so they're out there looking for businesses that do have purpose and do have principles. So I think that real accentuated amplification of purpose in businesses largely over the last 2 years as a result of people having the breathing space to recognize that beyond the salaries, some of their jobs actually don't mean much more than just the salary and the title, and they're looking for a bit more purpose in their life and their professional lives than what they have.
Yeah. I mean, you've spoken to so many leaders over the last couple of years. What is it that, when you're speaking to them, what is it that makes you see good leadership? What does that look like?
Well, I guess it comes back to those 7 principles, but it also comes back to, so those I've highlighted in the first answer, but I guess it also comes back to communication is such a massively underrated skill or characteristics of leadership. And we do talk about it, but we don't actually get into the nuts and bolts, and so many leaders think they're communicating, think they're having a dialogue, but actually they're just having a monologue.
Yeah.
And that's I think one of the fundamental challenges that we've got in business is to actually listen first, to understand the perspective of someone else, particularly if you are a leader and those people you are speaking to or having a conversation with happen to be in a role that sits perhaps beneath you in terms of its role definition. So if you're the CEO, whether it's management, whether it's employees, whatever it happens to be, our ability as a leader to understand the perspective of the person we're speaking to, listening to their perspective, trying to put yourself in their shoes, I think is one of the most critical skills we're going to need as we come out of the pandemic. Because I think many of us think we're communicating, but those we're communicating to don't understand the principle and the context of our conversation, because they're not sitting in the management meetings, they're not drafting the messaging, they're not developing the vision for the business. So how can they contextually understand what we're saying to them? So I think that's one of the key things, having a dialogue, not a monologue as leaders.
Yeah, it's hard these days to share everything with your staff, especially now we're working in a hybrid environment. And I suspect that that's going to continue for a lot of companies for a very long time. How do you think you can be a good virtual leader? I mean, you can't give every single person the time to have a one-on-one with them all. So how do you do that well virtually?
See, I'm not entirely convinced that the challenge we have with the pandemic is unique in terms of that hybrid or that virtual world. My own view is any business that had more than one office had some sort of hybrid world already, because the CEO wasn't in another office. And if you amplify that across the world for a global business, you may have had 10, 20, 30, 100 offices. So they've already had those challenges, many businesses. So I think all the pandemic has done has amplified the challenges that already existed within business. And for those businesses that had great leaders and great cultures that wanted to have communication and dialogue and bring people in and make that culture inclusive, then they have found ways to adapt to the world we now find ourselves in. And for those businesses that didn't want to have a communication and didn't have good leadership or a CEO and didn't have a strong culture, then those challenges have only been amplified by the pandemic as a result, and they haven't found ways to keep communication going. So I think it's accentuated the problem, but it didn't create the problem, the pandemic. It's only accentuated and amplified either opportunities or problems that already existed. So in terms of virtual leadership, I've had some great conversations with people who have had those kind of town hall conversations, who have taken random opportunities to ring random people within the organization as a CEO, whatever the case may be, sending little boxes of goodies to people right around the world. I've seen this happen in practice. So I think it's only, if you've got a great culture, you've got a great leader, then you're creative and you're committed to finding ways to keeping the conversation going in a more virtual environment.
Yeah. Those people that you've spoken to over the last couple of years, they've all been in the pandemic. Is there anyone in particular that has really stood out, that's blown you away when you've been speaking with them?
I wouldn't want to cite any one guest, because I think they've all been incredible guests. But one thing that touched me recently, and that was only last week, I had a conversation with a global leadership expert called Dove Barron. And the reason this particular point touched me is because we all have this in our lives, or professional lives, most of us, and that was around imposter syndrome. And he made a really interesting point to me, and I thought it was incredibly clever. And he said when he was a boy, his father had walked out when he was about 7, and as he was walking out the door, his father had said to him, "You're the man of the house now." And he felt clearly at 7 years old completely incapable of being the man of the house. And because he does a lot of work with his imposter syndrome and with his emotional source code, he recognized that the essence of his imposter syndrome as an adult was traced back to that point, to where he felt he was not capable of leading the household, if you like, in that particular moment. But he said that his imposter syndrome, he's turned 180 degrees on itself. So he believes his imposter syndrome is because he wants to be better, not because he's a failure, not because he can't do it, but because he's on the edge of doing something great, because he wants to be better, because he wants to use it to inspire himself to take a step forward. And I thought for all of us who get caught in this kind of daily dance with doubt, actually using it as a superpower rather than as a barrier is a really interesting way to turn the imposter syndrome challenge around now to our favor, to our balance. So that's something, because it's very recent and because it resonated very much with me personally, that was a really interesting point to kind of start off 2022 with as well. That actually this is a year that we could use our imposter syndrome to our advantage rather than to our detriment.
Yeah, I think that's so true as well. And, I've spoken to so many CEOs over the years, and when you really get into the depths of it, they're always having imposter syndrome.
Absolutely.
When you hear that and you hear that they have the same challenges that every single other person has, it just makes you realize that you're not alone. So with the different leaders that you've spoke to, is there a trend in ones that make better leaders, from sales, from marketing, from operations? What's your view on that?
No, I don't think one particular discipline within a business provides a better leader. I think it again all comes down to characteristics of the individual, and those who are prepared to keep learning, those who are prepared to keep listening, those who have a sense of humility, I think is a really great characteristic as a leader. To obviously everyone comes from different environments, but either never always recognizing where you came from in relation to where you've got, or if you didn't come from a challenging environment, then recognize that sometimes others do, and you try to put yourself in their shoes, as I said earlier. So I don't think it's just about a professional skill set, marketing, operations, or whatever it happens to be, but actually it's the characteristics and the makeup of those who are prepared to keep listening, to keep learning, to keep humble, and to keep challenging themselves and others, act as an inspiration.
Yeah. And often leaders get it wrong. I've seen over my years and years in business where, seen right in front of me, leaders get it wrong time and time again. Do you think there are common mistakes that leaders face?
I think it comes back to the point I made earlier. Not listening is perhaps the biggest mistake that leaders continually make. Making the assumption, as I said, that you have the answers now that you're a leader. I mean, I often think about, and I talk about this sometimes on the new P&L and with the clients that I have, if you think about all of those retail stores that go to the wall, bricks and mortar retail stores, and let's say they've got 10,000 employees, and often the leadership is devoid of ideas, or they run out of ideas, or they can't figure out how to transform the business, and they can't figure out how to compete with the online businesses, and they go to the wall. But I often think that every one of those 10,000 employees probably has one idea to change their little world and their sphere of influence within that business. And if management had gone out and asked all employees for one idea to change, it could be something about the way the till is done, or something about what you do in the warehouse, or something about operations or marketing, or whatever it happens to be. You might end up with 10,000 ideas, and let's say 10% of those ideas were practical ideas that could be implemented. And then 10% of those ideas were transformational ideas for that business. That means there's 100 ideas out of 10,000 ideas that could have been transformational for that business. And that's only 5% of those ideas. But they don't go out. They may be going to a management consultant. They may go to others external to the business to seek advice from professionals, but they don't come to the very people within that business that could offer them the shop floor transformational ideas that could transform or create the new opportunities for business. So I think that's a big mistake that some leaders make, is that you don't engage employees enough. You just expect them to do their job, but you don't solicit their advice, their creativity, their innovation. We have at the New P&L Brand Purpose Institute, we have a methodology called the mantra principle, and it's the 6 core components for a more principled and purpose-led business. And it's an acronym, and the N in that mantra is for a nation of creatives. And that's because we believe that there are a nation of creatives, frustrated creatives within a business, that are just dying to be asked for their innovative solution to the challenge that they face right in front of them. And I would encourage all leaders to embrace and engage and open up the conversation with those within their business to see what suggestions, opportunities, solutions they have to the challenges that business faces, before they go out to someone who doesn't really understand the business and ask the same question. You've got so many people within a business who are desperate and dying to offer a creative and innovative solution to the challenges that business has, if only they were asked.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also think that, and it's come up a lot in the last 3, 4, 5 years about a diverse workforce. And in particular, I've been part of a movement of trying to get more female leadership in place. And there's a big lack of female leaders. Do you think that there's a particular reason why there is a lack of female leadership?
I think there are still clearly some significant barriers to break down. There's still a generation, perhaps, in the widest possible terms, who need to change perceptions about diversity and inclusion. Sometimes diversity is used as an excuse for not including. Diversity is only half the battle. The other is giving voice to people who you have brought into the business, because I think a voice is equally as important as representation. You've got to give voice to the most diverse range of people that you can within that business, and respect that voice and listen to that voice and act on the basis of that voice. So I just think there's a generation that still, we've made tremendous progress, but there is still a long way to go in terms of lots of different areas and lots of opening up to a more diverse voice and to listening to that more diverse range of voices within business. We have a long way to go, but we've come so far.
Yeah, I do think we've come far, and I think that there is a long way to go. In your personal career, have you had any really outstanding, I always think about the leaders that I've had and who I do want to be and who I don't want to be, but who inspires you? Is it a leader, or are you inspired by people that have not been your leader yet?
My biggest inspiration is my mum, actually. She's not a business person. She is a community activist and advocate in Aotearoa, New Zealand. She's been a on the street kind of foot on the concrete activist for 40 years. She's taught me all about courage and resilience and never, persistence beats resistance and all that sort of mentality. She's worked on behalf of marginalised groups in New Zealand for, as I say, for 4 decades. And she is everything I have in business, I think I have as a result of her inspiration to me, resilience, courage, determination, and just, don't feel sorry for yourself, never give up, keep pushing, maybe change direction or maybe change the road, but don't change the direction. But she would be my number one inspiration. And yeah, she's just a phenomenal individual. And that's my, more than any business person, that is my my most inspirational leader.
Thank you for sharing that. You can tell your face really lights up when you talk about her, and I have the same feeling about my mum too. Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today and dig a bit deeper into the new P&L, Principles and Leadership. I will obviously tag your podcast and share your LinkedIn profile so people can get in touch with you. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it. And yeah, great to have you here today. Thanks.
Thanks, Sam. Real pleasure to be here. Thank you.